The Duncan Demons come into the 2026 season looking to build off the momentum they got in 2025 when they made it to the playoffs for the first time since 2020. This is the Duncan Demon preview here on the Prep Redzone Oklahoma YouTube channel. I'm joined by their head coach, Matt Terry. And coach, let's start, with last season. Duncan had been knocking on the door of, being one of those teams that is contending for a playoff spot. It had been a couple of years since you guys had been in the playoffs, but, you finally are able to knock that door down, get to the dance in Class 5A. Obviously, you ran into Carl Albert in the first round, but, in Class 5A, a lot of people have had problems with the Titans here recently. But, when you look back at last year and the journey that it took, that you guys took to get back to the playoffs, what stands out to you about last season?
That senior class, they went through a 1-9 year and a 4-6 year where at 4-6 year, we had a chance week 10 to make the playoffs, but Midwest City is really good. So that their senior year, they knew to make history, they were going to knock that door down, and so we had 17 seniors, great leaders, a bunch of stat producers, 3 or 4 linemen that started 3 or 4 years for us. So, they had their mind made up day one of off season and to make the playoffs as their goal, and, our district last year was tough. We had 3 out of 4 teams make the semifinals. So they knew going into Midwest City we had a chance, and they played really well that game. I mean, obviously, like you said, somebody's going to play Carl Albert round one, but I'd rather play on round one and then watch them play somebody else. So, I thought our team did well last year, making the playoffs. It's a big momentum for the guys we got this year. They've never experienced it. So now this team made it last year. So now that's their goal, to make the playoffs and try to win round one, take it a step further. So, last year was a big stepping stone for our program, for our staff that's been here the last 3 years. And it is a great year for that senior class to go out on.
Yeah, what have the 9 months been like, coming off that season? And you mentioned how special that senior class was. And not only did you have, a decent, probably a little over half of your starters were seniors, but you mentioned guys that had been starting for Duncan for 2, 3 years. And so not only did you have a ton of experience that you lost to graduation, but guys that had been through the fire, over the last couple of seasons. And then now you're going into a new year where you bring back, half of your starters on both sides of the ball, a little less than half. But at the same time, there has to be some momentum that you guys can take away from how last season ended, making it back to the playoffs. Just walk me through the off season and the first couple of weeks of practice. I got to think that, this group is playing with, more confidence than maybe previous teams have.
Yeah, one thing about Duncan is we have a bunch of multi-sport athletes. So, as soon as football till end of May, we don't see most of our kids. They're in the weight room with their other sports. So summer pride and spring ball is really the first time we see them, and we have a bunch of guys, like you said, that have been role players, hadn't been starters, but, they've been starters on state tournament baseball teams, so won a state championship in track. So they've been under the big lights, and that senior class we lost had a bunch of great leaders, and these guys learned under them each day at practice. The competition was intense last year. So, we have a bunch of guys that are in big time key roles that hadn't started a game until August 28th. And so, but it's not like it's their first time in varsity action. They play varsity in other sports. And I know people say Friday Night Lights is a different animal. It is, but, they've been in big time games before. So these guys are fired up. It's probably one of our best summer pride attendance since I've been here. We have a bunch of people holding other players accountable. And they know that we have a bunch of spots that are open, in this first 3 or 4 weeks going into week 0.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those players that we need to know about. And starting on the offensive side of the ball, you mentioned having to replace a few of those very experienced offensive linemen, but you're also going to have a new quarterback. Sawyer Rice graduates, and he had a fantastic career. You mentioned the success in track; he was a part of that as well. Who are the guys on this year's team offensively that we need to know about for Duncan? And you mentioned, some of those roles are still up for grabs after the first couple of weeks of practice, but of the established guys and maybe some breakout, potential breakout players for Duncan this fall, who are some of those guys on offense we need to know about this season?
We returned 2 linemen, Cord Byerly, Caden Morris. They're both juniors. Cord will eventually be a 4-year starter for us. He had to get thrown in the fire his freshman year at center. So those two guys have to lead us up front until we get these other three guys moving along. Quarterback will be Caleb Davis. He shortstop on the baseball team, so he plays another sport where it's an intense position. He's a kid that can play any position we want. So he's a competitor. Last year we lost our receiver late in summer pride to a broken ankle, so he missed the entire junior year. And Eric Hernandez, so he's a guy that takes this locker room and is a true leader and big time playmaker. He's on the track team, two-time state champion. We got two running backs that are very physical. Ty Lane is a senior, and then Kai Haynes, who will be a sophomore. Those two guys run behind their shoulder pads. So we've got some skill guys. Bladen Harper and Sam Lipscomb, they play linebacker for us, so they're going to be our H tight end type guys. So we've got some really good skill guys. It's just a matter of how fast can our line come on, breaking three new guys.
And then on the other side of the ball, defensively, I'm sure that some of the guys that you already mentioned on offense are also going to turn around and play significant minutes, if not start for you guys defensively. We've seen that over the last couple of years with guys that have been able to do a little bit of both. Defensively, what can we expect from the Demons heading into this season?
Defensively, I think we don't fall off very much. I know we graduated some guys that are 2 and 3 year starters, but our D line is probably going to be the biggest D line we've had since I've been here. And two of them are going to be brand new starters, but one was eligibility issue last year, moved in, and so didn't get eligible. So he's going to be our defensive tackle. He's about 3'10", athletic kid, really strong kid. But yeah, like you said, we got Eric Hernandez will play in the secondary. Ty Lane will play in the secondary. Bladen and Sam will play at linebacker. We return our Mike linebacker, who's a 3 year starter. So defensively, we're going to be, a lot older, more mature than we are offensively early on. So our defense is going to have to keep us in the games until we get to district play.
Yeah, and you guys are opening up the schedule against an interesting non-district schedule, because I look at this slate that you have in the first 3 weeks, and there's a lot of potential with your opponents, but also a lot of unknowns. So there's so much unknown in the first month of the season, but that's the case for a lot of teams across the state. As you open up the year against Altus at home in week 0, then you go to Cache in week 1. You will host Lawton Eisenhower in week 2, but then you'll wrap up non-district play against one of the better 4A teams in Western Oklahoma with Weatherford in week 3. And then you have the district slate, and you guys are switching districts this season, where last year, you mentioned earlier, you were in a district with 3 teams in Bishop McGinnis, Lawton MacArthur, and Newcastle that all made it to the 5A semifinals. And now you get out of that district, but you find yourself in a district with the defending state champs at Carl Albert. You open up district play at home against Noble, then you go to Durant in week 6, and then you host Carl Albert in week 7 after a bye week. You go to Midwest City in week 8. You host Lawton High on week 9, and then you go to Guthrie in week 10. And when I look at that schedule, Coach, I mentioned the unknowns in non-district play with, Altus losing a lot, but they're always a competitive team. Cache always has athletes. Lawton Eisenhower always has athletes. Weatherford is Weatherford. But then, that district slate, it's a tough district opener against Noble, but then those last 4 games, Carl Albert, Midwest City, Lawton, and Guthrie, it's going to feel like the playoffs have started a few weeks, if not a month early for Duncan heading into this season.
Yeah, getting Altus back on the schedule week 0 is big. Altus Duncan, I graduated from Altus, so Altus Duncan rivalry is big, and we've played forever. Lost them the last 2 years of district, being in different districts, so that's a big week 0 game. Both communities, we play each other in every other sport, but yes, our games leading up to district play should get us ready, and Weatherford. They're going to test us really well, up front. They're always big. So, yes, our district is you got Carl Albert and Guthrie are the 2 big dogs in our district, and everybody else is trying to play catch up with them. But it's a competitive district where, you go in each week and you don't know who's going to win, who's going to lose, where, some districts you go into a week, you're like, oh, this is going to be a blowout, So it's a competitive schedule for our guys. Our guys are fired up. They're playing teams that they hadn't played in their high school career many times. We lost MacArthur, and that's a big rivalry for us, but we gained Lawton High. So, Lawton and Duncan's 30 minutes away. So our kids are fired up, and so it will be interesting how our district plays out. Obviously we do have the defending state champion, and everybody's going to be chasing those guys early on with what they return. But 2, 3, 4, Guthrie loses a little bit up front, but they're going to be Guthrie, and so 2 through 4 could be interesting, throughout the district play.
Yeah, that's kind of been the storyline for Class 5A. I've been talking with coaches and doing these previews for the last it feels like 6 months, but it's only been about 6 weeks since July 1st we started our preview series. And anytime I'm talking Class 5A football, yeah, Carl Albert gets brought up, and rightfully so. You win 9 championships in 10 years, you're going to be talked about. But at the same time, I look at Class 5A and I'm trying to find a district where it's like, okay, that's manageable. Like, you should be able to make the play. Every district in Class 5A feels like a potential gauntlet, a potential bloodbath. You're going to have to work your tail off just to make one of those 4 playoff spots. And like I've said many, many times, there are going to be good teams when November rolls around that are going to have to check in their equipment early. They'll have to move on to basketball or wrestling season or a combination of the two because they just lost the wrong game at the wrong time. But there are going to be some really good football teams that get left out. And so on one hand, 5A is so interesting, coach, and I'm sure you know this, and talking with coaches all across this class, yeah, Carl Albert is the big bad monster in Class 5A, but look everywhere else. There are teams and players and coaches and programs that are going to light it up every single Friday night.
Yeah, that's what makes high school football so much fun to watch. They don't like the games where they know who the winner is going to be. And games 1 through 10 for us, it's all going to be competitive. Obviously, yeah, we got beat by Carl Albert last year, but I thought we played really well in the second half after we got the wide-eyed look out of the way in the first half. Pulling their stadium with all their footballs on their press box. So, our kids, I just want to go play hard. And the chips fall how they may, and whether it's against Carl Albert at home on a fall break night, just go play. Just go play. You never know what happens. And so we're going to try to put ourselves in the best possible scenario to make the playoffs. And it starts early in the first game in district play.
Yeah, and we'll get you out of here on this because you guys took that first step last year. You ended a little small playoff drought. You guys had been to the playoffs in 2020, hadn't been back since then until last year. So you ended that drought, and so that's step one, right? You're starting to play winning football at a more consistent level. You make it to the playoffs. Now the next step is obviously, all right, how do we win that first round game? How do we set ourselves up in district play to finish with a higher seed, to have a more favorable matchup? Although as we talk about how deep and competitive Class 5A is, I don't know what the favorable matchup in this class would be for a first round game. But at the same time, what does Duncan have to do in 2026 to take that next step to not only make it back to the playoffs, but to get a first round win and start competing with some of the top teams in this class that are always in that conversation year in and year out?
The biggest thing is you got to stay healthy in this class. You can't get beat up early. You got to be healthy every game, which I know you get late in the year and there's going to be bumps and bruises, but we've got to have all of our guys. There's a few games last year where I feel, I don't know what the scoreboard is going to say, but I feel we cost ourselves, in a few big games that we had 5 or 6 turnovers. So, you can't do that with a young group early on. Especially like the Noble and Durant games, you cannot go lose a turnover battle and expect to make the playoffs. If you lose those 2 games, you're fighting an uphill battle with the remaining teams we got. So, we got to stay healthy, and we got to win the turnover battle and rely on our defense early until our offense can come on.
Coach, thank you so much for your time. I've been saying it for the last 6 weeks, Class 5A. Yeah, a lot of conversation is around Carl Albert, considering what they've done over the last decade. But man, look everywhere else in this class, and you see great football being played. It's going to be a fun class to watch unfold. Looking forward to catching up with you during the season.
Thanks for having us.
That's Duncan head coach Matt Terry joining us for the Duncan Demon preview here on the Prep Redzone Oklahoma YouTube channel. To read more about the Demons, you can check out our preview article right now on prepredzone.com/Oklahoma. We have a link to that article in the video description below. And while you're there, check out all of our team previews. We started this all the way back on July 1st, talking about teams from 6A1 all the way down to Class A2 with the most in-depth and comprehensive team previews that you will find anywhere. I'm not talking about like, hey, here's a couple players to watch, here's the schedule, and that's it. No, we're talking about a complete breakdown on the schedule, a breakdown on every single game, ton of player information to look out for this season, over 2,000 words. Every single preview that you find on the website right now will have either close to or over 2,000 words in it. The most in-depth coverage that you will find anywhere to get ready for the 2026 season. And then while you're here on YouTube, we want to encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel as we put out more video content than ever before, not only here in the summer and leading up to kickoff with our preview series with interviews with coaches all across the state of Oklahoma. But once the season kicks off, we're going to have a ton of coverage as well. That means more game highlights, more coaches interviews during the week, player to watch features every single week. And we're also going to do a live show every Saturday where we'll answer your questions, talk about all the top performances, all the top outcomes from the week that was in high school football. So every single day, there's going to be something new. Once the season kicks off, every single day on the website, on the YouTube channel, there's going to be something new there for you to check out, as nobody covers Oklahoma high school football quite like Prep Red Zone. All right, one final time for Coach Terry. I'm Michael Knight, and this has been the Duncan Demon Preview here on the Prep Redzone Oklahoma YouTube channel.